The next speaker up we have is KARTHIK GAEKWAD. He'd be speaking on Kube apps in action. He's a veteran engineer who enjoys building software products from scratch using cloud and container technologies. He works at Oracle as a principal evangelist for cloud-native space and is the author of many courses on Kubernetes. He organizes several conferences, including DevOps Days in Austin, Container Days, and has chaired the DevOps tracks for Agile conferences. He has been sleep deprived for the past 6 months, with his only hobby being changing the diapers for a 6-month-old. I hope you get good sleep last night. So, ladies and gentlemen, I request you all to please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Let's see, do I need to turn this on? Nope, sounds like there's an echo, so it looks like it's working. So I've started to do this new thing now where I noticed that people take pictures of the speaker. So I'm going to go reverse and take a picture of the audience. Awesome. How is everybody doing? Good? Well, the talk right after lunch is always kind of boring, so I'm hoping to not put folks to sleep. One thing I did was, because I've noticed that a lot of folks like to take pictures of everything, the slides for this and the code for this is already online, so you can take a picture of this. It's just on SlideShare for Kube apps in action. So I'll pause a couple of minutes. So that way the rest of the time you can just be free and watch this or watch a YouTube video, whatever. Doesn't matter. Okay, a couple more folks taking pictures. Everybody good? Awesome. So my name is Karthik. Namaskar, namaste. I work at Oracle, and when I say I work at Oracle, immediately people ask me like DBA questions, like, hey, can you tell me about this feature that Exadata just released? Or, I have 2 normal form and I need to get to 3 normal form. How do I do that? Blah, blah, blah. And my answer is always, I don't know, because I do a lot of cloud stuff, and Oracle has started to do a lot of things in the cloud, in the last few years. And I've actually come into Oracle using container technologies, and I was a part of a acquisition called Stack Engine, so that drives a lot of things that we do in Oracle. Today I work in this, team called Cloud Native Labs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And before this new team that I joined, I used to work on the Oracle Managed Kubernetes team, so I wrote a lot of Kubernetes code. I've been in industry for a while. I was telling the folks just before this, one of the guys has literally just started, has been a software engineer for a month. And I was like, when I was writing this, I was like, how long have I been in industry? And it's been 15 years. But it doesn't really feel like 15 years. It just feels like, like I still remember my first job. And it's interesting how time really flies. In general, though, I like building stuff, and I like working with other people. So in Austin, Bangalore has an awesome DevOps community, and I'm privileged to be a part of this here today. And Austin, in many ways, is very similar to Bangalore, where everybody is very close-knit, and we kind of work with each other to solve problems. And I've been a part of that community for 15 years as well. We do, just like we have DevOps Days Bangalore, we have a DevOps Days Austin. Similar kind of format, and similar kind of stuff that happens over there too. And we have other conferences too, like Cloud Austin and Container Days, etc. I also do a bunch of stuff with. I've noticed that once you work in industry for a while, you start doing all these other things to try and give back. And so, I help chair the Cloud Native track on the All Day DevOps conference, and I've also done a bunch of stuff with some other conferences too. If you're on LinkedIn and you are subscribed to LinkedIn Learning, you might have seen my Kubernetes course on there, or lynda.com. And so I'm happy to kind of take any Kubernetes questions and stuff in the open space time. Big elephant in the room, why did I put this picture up there? Ironically, my boss, I give many talks, and I've been changing my profile picture here and there in the talks. And my boss came to me. He's a senior VP at Oracle, right? So can't ignore stuff he says. And he was like, "Hey, don't you have like a better picture? Do we need to take you to the studio to like get you a better picture?" And I was like, at first I was surprised he was asking me this, and then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, no, not really. But I didn't have a good answer. And then like 2 minutes later, I was like, my kid makes this face, but I make this face too when I look at this is the CNCF landscape, Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And it basically has all these different things about Kubernetes, like different projects, different tools, etc. I see some people in the back squinting to kind of see what the heck this is, and you shouldn't, because there's so many of them. In fact, there's 611 cards on here that, blah, blah, blah. And as a part of like evangelism at Oracle, doing cloud native stuff, I'm supposed to kind of know all of these pieces. And everything changes really fast in the cloud native space or Kubernetes space. The people who do Kubernetes stuff already know this, but things change really, really fast. So, every morning or every week, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So I kind of make that face at work. So today, they call it CNCF is a rich ecosystem, and I put the quotes because, rich. When people say rich ecosystem, it's kind of a double-edged sword, or it's kind of a trap, because rich means lots of stuff. And that's good because you know that everything is healthy in there. But the problem is there's also a lot of things going on. So you have to dig in and spend a lot of time to understand whether a specific tool, whether a specific feature actually fits your use case. So that can be really challenging if you're new to this, to Kubernetes, or new to CNCF, new to cloud native. It can be pretty challenging. And in fact, Nipendra Kare and I are giving a talk at KubeCon Seattle next week on some of the challenges that we see that a lot of new people coming into the ecosystem kind of do or kind of have. So let's get a quick audience poll. I feel like I'm going to be talking a lot, so I just had a quick show of hands of how many people are developers in here. Okay, I'm guessing a lot of folks are back-end developers. Anyone doing Node, JS, or anything? Okay, a few Node folks. What about operations or DevOps? Okay, like I thought. And anyone else that's not in either of those, like product management, testing, show of hands? Few folks. No DBAs, right? Okay, well, that's fine too. And what about containers? Do folks already use Kubernetes or know about Kubernetes? Show of hands. Okay, maybe 40%. And what about running Kubernetes in production? Wow, okay, awesome. So that's a good kind of thing to know, and I always kind of ask that so I know how to address the audience. So we're going to be talking about Kubernetes, and one thing that nobody will tell you is when you meet DevRel people at conferences and stuff like that, either we work for sales or we work for marketing. So this is my one marketing slide. If you need to try out some of the stuff we do or whatever, or if you wanted cloud credits or whatever, you can do that there. And so where were we? Oh yeah, we were talking about the craziness in the ecosystem. And so basically, the CNCF does a survey every year. So they've done it a few years now, and so some of the challenges that we have with cloud native adoption is, monitoring security, lack of training, some cultural challenges, and complexity. So they did this the year before as well, and there used to be specific technical challenges like storage, networking, reliability, logging, scaling, all of that stuff. It's kind of gone down because I think there's a lot of documentation on this, but one thing that's really bad about open source projects, and I think we're getting better at this as a community in general, but it's really hard to go read the documentation and figure out whether things work or not. But that being said, today we're actually writing some documentation, so we're better off than before where, me personally, I would just push something to GitHub and release it, but not have any docs. So somebody would be like, hey, how do you actually use this thing, even though it's open source? So technical challenges associated with that. We internally at Oracle did a survey with our customers, and we kind of asked, okay, like what are some of the challenges we face? Or what are some of the challenges that you guys face? And it was very similar. A lot of this has to do with actually management of Kubernetes and managing your control plane, et cetera. Also figuring out how to deal with your data in your Kubernetes clusters, and then what to do with networking storage. Also, Oracle, really large company, works with other really large companies, so trying to figure out how to work with large teams that are using resources. So some of this stuff, in industry today, we kind of say, oh yeah, you should always be using managed Kubernetes service. It's like there's GKE, there's Amazon has one, Azure has one, Oracle has one. And from a vendor point of view, everybody's like, use the managed service because it will help you do everything. But the trap there is you still have to do your management, or coming back here, the providers kind of help you manage this part, which is the control plane. So your etcd, your cluster management, and all of the inner workings of Kubernetes, that's something that's managed. But your actual data plane, which is where you have your nodes and your applications are running, those are things that you still need to actually manage yourself. So with that, you kind of get into different kind of concerns with respect to with DevOps, the four big things are logging, monitoring, telemetry, and scaling. Scaling is kind of a little bit simplified when you use the managed service, but a lot of times you just have logging, monitoring, telemetry. How do you do that? So a large part of this presentation is kind of based on I'll take those three aspects, and then we'll kind of walk through a quick demo of how to do all this stuff, so that when you're actually starting to do some of these things, you know how to go about it. So with those specific pieces, so on the Kubernetes front, if you just talk about open source, there's also closed source solutions, and we won't necessarily talk about those. But from an open source perspective, a lot of people and the community is really caught on to using Prometheus for doing a lot of kind of monitoring tasks alongside with Grafana. Quick show of hands of how many people use Prometheus today. Okay, a few people, that's cool. And then, for logging, the EFK or ELK stack has kind of been around for a long time, but that's also very prominent in the Kubernetes space now, where you can actually run EFK. EFK, when I say that, it's Elasticsearch, F is FluentD, and K is Cabana. So Cabana is the dashboard. FluentD helps your logs kind of get in to the system, and that actually goes into Elasticsearch. And then from a telemetry perspective, many years ago, 5 years ago, everybody was kind of using New Relic to do telemetry to figure out, where your data is kind of going, where's the longest time it's taking in your application, et cetera. But today on the open source side, we have open tracing, which is the standard, and then there's different tools that actually implement the standard, namely Zipkin and Jaeger. And since Jaeger is the CNCF project that is blessed by the CNCF, we'll kind of look at the demo from that perspective. Quick shout out to Cloud Native Labs. So we talked about the survey that we did internally at Oracle, and a lot of our customers really have a lot of issues kind of getting started. So that's part of the reason we started the Cloud Native Labs team. And this is just a screenshot on there. It's cloudnative.oracle.com. A lot of the stuff that we'll talk about today, like Prometheus and Elasticsearch, Helm, et cetera, there's a bunch of demos that you can go and run from our site. So feel free to check that out. And then we keep pushing stuff out for Kubernetes specifically, because I think the community has a hard time understanding how to actually do things from the Kubernetes point of view. So we have a lot of one-on-one kind of demos. So with that, let's actually jump in. Let's close that. All right. Okay, so let's make this bigger. This is the GitHub project. Make this a little bit bigger. And then we're going to use Kubernetes. So I'll log into our console so you kind of see what that looks like. This is the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Console, or like the cloud console that we have. So from here, you go into menu, we have developer services, container OKE, and you'll notice that once this populates, we have a cluster in here. So make this a little bit bigger. We'll call this cluster 2, and this has some amount of nodes in there. So this guy is has a node pool ID. It has a cluster ID, for example, blah blah blah. And then there's an upgrade available as well. So we kind of handle upgrades for you. So I'm on 111.1, but really I should be on 111.5 because of the. So if folks are already using Kubernetes today, make sure that you know about the vulnerability that was disclosed last week. So make sure you're on a path to upgrade your clusters, because right now it's kind of open to a lot of stuff. So anyways, so this guy, that's not actually the exciting part. The exciting part is, the actually getting to the console. So how does it look from the back? Can you guys see the text? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Just to make sure that I'm not fooling you guys, and actually make sure I'm not fooling myself. Okay, cool. So it is the same cluster too. So awesome. So let's look at what we have in this cluster. And actually, before we do that, we'll go to my GitHub page. This is just Karthik in e-commerce. My very first job was working in an e-commerce team. So now all the demos I do are typically just e-commerce related demos. And so the code associated with this is there's 3 things in the source folder. There's a cart, and this is kind of too big. Even bigger, smaller, a little bit better. Okay. The code is not super important, and we'll step through all the different pieces. But basically, we have 3 pieces in here. There's a cart, there's a catalog, and then there's users. So the cart is something that users can put items in. The catalog is everything that somebody can buy, and the users is login and profile kind of management stuff. So let's go back to our cluster and let's see what we have in there. kubectl get deployments. And assuming the networking works. Okay, so to begin, what I have is I have a bunch of deployments. I have something for EFK, I have a Jaeger deployment, and I have some stuff for Prometheus. And if I do a Helm ls, Helm is the language that it's a package manager for Kubernetes specifically. And so you can use Helm to build large complicated applications. So a lot of people use it to build like a one whole project or a specific microservice or something like that. I don't like the formatting on here, so I'm gonna make this just a little bit smaller and maybe pull this out just a little bit more. Okay, so that's great. And I have so the reason I started with the things already deployed is we can spend time understanding how to actually run and deploy, or you can just go and run the actual things in here. But let's go and actually see what this is doing behind the scenes. So let's log into Cabana first. So I can do a get services and get the Cabana logging thing. So this is running on a load balancer. Copy that, put it here, and then 5601. So this will open the Cabana dashboard. And you guys have already seen this before. We've talked about Cabana, and in fact, based on yesterday's talk, maybe you shouldn't be using Cabana and EFK, but check out Burrito instead. So we have that open. We have kubectl get services, and I'm going to open up Prometheus as well. Once again, don't like the way this is formatted just a bit. Okay, and you guys can still see it from the back, right? Okay, so Prometheus is a Prometheus server. It runs on a node port. Node port is just a Kubernetes construct, so I need kubectl get nodes. And then once I know what nodes it's running on, I can put that there. And then this is pointed to 30,001, except I need a colon. Cool. So that's Prometheus. And in Prometheus, when you do the initial install with the Helm chart that we have, we provide a Prometheus values file. And so if you take a look at that values file, this is kind of big, and we could have made this, kind of concise a little bit more, but it basically talks about all the different things that, Prometheus has. So there's a service account that Prometheus runs under. There's Alert Manager. Alert Manager is a component of Prometheus that helps you do alerting. There's files associated with Alert Manager. Kube State Metrics is the metrics provider from Kubernetes to Prometheus. So the reason you want this installed initially is that it'll help you get data that's Kubernetes related into Prometheus when you start up Prometheus. Node Exporter is another tool or library inside of Prometheus that helps you get information from nodes into Kubernetes. Server, push gateway. This server is the Prometheus server, and the push gateway is another component that we won't really use. Server files in Prometheus, this part actually defines all of the things that you are trying to send out into Kubernetes. So this is kind of the most important part. And I'm going to kind of like scroll through here a little bit, but basically you have everything in Prometheus is a job. So you have here you have Kubernetes API server. This is basically taking all the data from the Kubernetes API server, sending it into Prometheus. And there's the config associated with that. You also have Kubernetes nodes. This sends the node information. CAdvisor as well. Service endpoints, push gateway, Kubernetes service, and the one that we will actually use, which is the Kubernetes pods. And this thing actually sends pod information over to Prometheus. So I know that was a lot of stuff, but it's kind of nice to just kind of get a high-level feel of what that is. And then from a tracing standpoint, we use Jaeger. So if I go back to my console, I had my Jaeger agent or my Jaeger query, which is a load balancer. So I'll copy that, and I will run that. And so this just will open up the Jaeger UI that you may or may not have seen before. It populates with one service by default, which is the Jaeger query. Also make this a little bit bigger so you can see. And the Jaeger query is basically Jaeger itself. So when you install this tool, it can instrument itself. So good news, all of this stuff is working, but it's kind of useless, right? Because we don't have any apps deployed or whatever. So let's deploy our actual e-commerce application. And so I'll do kubectl apply, go back here. So I have my microservices YAML, and actually, I guess I should show that before I just kind of go and do that. Simple YAML file for Kubernetes, for the folks that have done Kubernetes before. It's just a single deployment, and it has 4 containers in here, cart, catalog, auth, and Jaeger agent. The first 3 are very similar. It's just pulling this e-commerce cart thing that I've pushed into Docker Hub, and it exposes a specific port. So nothing magic over there, and just the code. So the code associated with cart is all the stuff in source over here. The code associated with catalog is the main file associated with catalog over there, and then auth is associated with users basically. And the common stuff that you see in here is just common files that we're kind of using. And then going on here, Kubernetes, there's a service, node port, etc. And we're just exposing it as node ports. So let's go and run this. kubectl apply -f, microservices YAML. Hopefully this works. It's always kind of nervous doing live demo on stage. Okay, it says it's created. So let's take a look. kubectl get deployments. So we should see a brand new thing. So we call this ecom deployment. So it says desired, current, up-to-date, available, 33333. Okay, so everything looks good. So let's look at the service, because I actually want to use it, right? And once again, it's a little bit hard to see. Make this smaller, make this wider. Okay, so e-commerce service running on cluster IP, specific port. So let's take that, put it in the web browser, and I need this actually. And oh god, okay, there we go. 32133. Okay, so this says, just very simple. Welcome to the Cart API. Nothing big here. Let's also pull up the other one. This will be the user's one. Actually, I'll make 3 tabs. And then I'll immediately forget which tab has what thing. This is the joy of demos. Okay, so this is a user's API, great. And then the last one will be okay, so this is the catalog. So let's go and hit the catalog and see what we get from there. So this is just returning, some random data, right? And so what we really are interested in is behind the scenes. If you look at the code for catalog, this is main code, blah, blah, blah. It's catalog is a product handler. So if you search for that, we have some logs that are being printed out. So these logs, you can do kubectl logs and get logs. But if you want to see it in, what we really want is to actually see this in Cabana. So let's see if it's actually showing up in there. So Cabana has been running. Let's see, last 15 minutes. Do an auto refresh of this every 5 seconds. And so we have some source, and it looks like there's some stuff coming in. New handler was called, but a lot of this stuff is really kind of disorganized. So let's look at, actually sorting this by pod name. So we'll add the pod name, and then we'll add the message, associated message, or we'll do both log and message. Okay, so, and I don't really care about EFK logs. I don't really care about dashboard. I could have sworn I saw a bunch of logs in here. So let's just reload this page a few times. So we generate some more logs. Go back into Cabana. And yeah, there we go. So we have a bunch of things coming from the specific pod, the logs and the message coming from that, in Cabana. So a lot of folks kind of use Cabana as when you're working in a production kind of setting, you might not have the access to, go into your production servers and run kubectl there. So it's kind of, abstracted away in a tool like EFK. So that's one part, right? So you're like, okay, that's great. What do we do next? So logging is one part, monitoring is the other part. So let's take a look at the monitoring piece, and that's Prometheus. So Prometheus, when we set this up, I will look at the users part. And when you set up Prometheus, regardless of whatever language you use, you kind of have to register your counters. So that's one kind of piece that's important inside of your application. And then wherever you're calling your login, etc., or wherever you're calling it, that's where you'll actually increment your counter. So in this case, I'm going to do a hello counter. This is my login handler. So if I search for this, login handler is for users login, and that handles all the login code associated with this. And anytime you log in, you'll get a specific Prometheus counter. And then also there's a success and fail. So if something succeeds, we'll increment the counter. If something fails, we'll decrement it, or not decrement it, we'll have another counter for that. So let's see if this actually works. We'll go back to that was the users API. So I can do users, and then it said login, and u equals Karthik. So this code is in GitHub, but please do not use this the login part of it for your own like production logging kind of thing, because you will find yourself in a really bad place. But I meant this more from an example standpoint. So I did some dummy stuff. It's saying invalid username password. I'll reload a bunch of times. I'll do the correct password, which is not a safe password. So please do not use hello world for your password. So we're getting back some data, right? So that's great. Prometheus, whenever you install it with your applications, you'll get a metrics endpoint. So if I hit the metrics endpoint from my application, you kind of see a lot of data associated with the application specifically. But the things I want to point out here is there's an auth call, right? And then there's an auth failure and an auth success. So these are basically tied to my code when I instrumented those like in my application. So that's nice. It's showing up in my endpoint, but does it show up in Prometheus? So let's reload this page. Prometheus, auth, calls, execute, and we see auth calls, which is awesome. We have so this is I did this by pod name, so you can kind of instrument this however you want, but for this specific use case, I put in the specific pod. So whatever pod actually responded with the auth call responded with that. And it also has auth failures, execute, and you'll kind of see auth stuff coming in. So that's great. So it looks like the monitoring piece is working. Now what about the third piece, which is telemetry? Like, is the telemetry portion actually working? So for that, on the cart side, we have a cart API. So I can go to cart, and then I think if I do KARTHIK, it will return some data. After I wrote all the stuff and pushed everything into Docker and whatnot, I realized that this is actually not valid JSON. So don't judge me. But sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But I'm just going to reload this a bunch of times, and we'll take a quick look at what the code is doing behind the scenes. So in the cart, we have the list handler. So this is basically, when you use Jaeger, everything is associated with spans. And a span is just like a span of time, how long something is taking. So we have a thing called cart list that we call. And then, that is actually starting a span. And then once this whole function completes, that's when it ends up closing. This is just a dummy like time.sleep, so we get some different data coming in. So let's go into Jaeger, into the UI. And actually, we have to reload this. And you'll notice that we now have service 2, which is great. And we have the cart service. So if I do a find trace, we'll notice that, hey, we have a cart list. The times are a little bit different. We can actually drill down into one of these and kind of open it up. Truth is, like, I didn't actually have a lot of data going on behind the scenes, so you don't actually, it's not super valuable to see this, but it actually depicts how Jaeger and all of the stuff works behind the scenes to actually get the data into the Jaeger UI. The other thing I really like about Jaeger specifically is you can select a couple of things and you can do a compare trace. So in scenarios where you're trying to find, what is like average time of something that's taking or whatever, you can kind of use this to do like a comparison between your different traces. So yeah, we can kind of see that, trace, blah, blah, blah. And then, kind of play around with the UI. So basically, I just wanted to talk through, all the different pieces that, from a DevOps standpoint, like installing Kubernetes is not the hard part, but it's actually using your applications that is more important. And a lot of things that we do from a DevOps standpoint, whether it's logging, monitoring, telemetry, et cetera, there's open source projects for that. And this is an example of all the open source stuff that we have. So feel free to take a look at this GitHub page. It's just my GitHub, Karthik e-commerce. And if you have questions or whatever, feel free to raise an issue. Yeah, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, or are we good? So yeah, any questions from folks? And I'll put this on here. Or did I bore you guys to sleep? Questions?
Okay, either it was really, really like all clear, or it was all clear.
Yeah, and one of the things about all of this stuff is like there's a lot of different ways to do it. One thing we notice a lot in Kubernetes is it's really hard to actually get started somewhere. So a lot of the stuff I kind of demoed with the install part, that's where everybody gets stuck. So the whole purpose of this is and the whole purpose for our team inside of Oracle is to actually like get people past that point, because really all you want to be doing when you're instrumenting applications, et cetera, is you want to be looking at your logs, or you want to be looking at your metrics, or you want to be looking at tracing data to figure out, hey, what's broken in my application. You don't want to like sit and figure out, oh, Kubernetes is having a problem with something, I don't know like what to do, blah blah blah. You don't want to be stuck in that world, because it's completely pointless. You want to actually be doing stuff on the application point of view. So that's kind of like where a lot of this tooling comes into play. So if there aren't any questions, we will end up. Any last questions from folks? All right. Cool. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.